Anybody here run a timber enterprise? But don't be shy, just be happy. Let organic matter sit on the soil, you'll get more trees, they'll get bigger, and you can turn those into wood to be, if you're allowed to cut them down, because you'll cross over the threshold and suddenly somebody in government will be saying, oh, wait a minute, look at that, it's now native timber. Nobody's ever used that country. Right, you'll lose it. But the reality is, all I'm getting at here is that you need to understand what the function is of that country to suit your enterprise. So if you're a grazing enterprise person, then you need to concentrate on the management practices, that bottom little boldy bit there, the management practices which will encourage your pattern of production. If you're running a grazing system or grazing enterprise, your systems and your patterns need to try and produce that as much as possible, because that is let the form express itself. You go to a school where they teach you to put litter on soil surface, trample a third, leave a third, whatever. Guess what? You're going to spend the rest of your life pushing shit uphill, trying to fight against nature when you're trying to create a woodland by your action, but you're trying to run livestock in there. Low productivity, low production numbers, even though you're running double what your set stocking neighbour will do. It's still poor outcomes for a grazing community, for a grazing enterprise. Righto. So what are these? At this stage, I've got a couple of take-home points here. First of all, old Jan Smuts's thing, nature works in patterns and wholes. I just take that a little bit further and say, if you want to change the whole, you've got to change the pattern. So there's got to be change in what you do. If you don't have change in what you do, you're going to end up with simplicity. Is that a fair statement? Do the same thing time and time again. It'll simplify the outcome. Simplifying the outcome, think of the word used in Stuart's presentation, my presentation, anyone you want, diversity. That's the opposite of simplicity. Everyone happy? So if you do the same thing time and time again, you will end up with simplicity. If you change it up a bit, you'll get that outcome of a little bit more diversity. So grazing naturally is about trying to create fit-for-purpose grazing ecosystems. Because, I mean, that's what I'm in with grazing. It's my business. I can talk other stuff. I can talk a little bit of multi-species stuff, etc. But my game here is about grazing, because it's where most of us are trying to make a living out of wild grazing that we're going to turn into profitable enterprises. To do that, let the form look after itself, continue that function, and work on the function. If you go the other way, you'll have a problem. Okay? What else have we got? So, some of the mistakes people make, these are just little key points at this point. Undergrazing will create you problems. If you're going to underutilize country, leave an ungrazed patch and a grazed patch. How does that happen? What that happens from is one of two things. Either you've put animals in a paddock for a long space of time and they've turned around and grazed the bits that grew again. Yeah? So they graze this, that's a tasty plant, they graze it, that plant regrows, they come and graze it again, so they don't graze the others. The other thing is that you put them in a smaller paddock, like we'll see at Bobby's today. He's a smaller paddock, he's upped his stock numbers to try and do the grazing naturally thing better, and he just hasn't upped them enough, A, or B, he's left them in there till too little time, so they've only selected this part of the community, those bits are not grazed. So what does the ungrazed bit of country do? It encourages woodland development, and you get your shrub development in there, and you get your weeds coming in, and you get your evolution into a woodland occurring. So those fungal roots there basically are going to start, your fungi is going to increase to cycle that carbon in the patch. The fungi, this is the visible fungi, not the modern cousins that are working as a mycorrhizal network. These guys are going to chew up some of that organic matter and the litter, and they're going to acidify the soil, reduce the production. You lose sunlight, and you lose your ability to use the little rainfall bits that are in there. Visible white fungi in a soil does not build soil humus. In fact, it destroys it. Okay, and then, of course, you'll be encouraged at those same schools to run hell of a high densities of animals. Now, the Americans Mate, it's easy there. That country came out from under the ice, straight under the belly of an animal. It's operating in a grazing ecosystem. If they go and put a big mob of animals together and graze a paddock once a year, the animals are going to be fine with it, the country's going to be fine with it, not much is going to change. Don't rely on those pictures. And don't rely on the bloke with the big tummy and the big handlebar moustache. Yeah, look at this picture behind me. You see all those wildebeests in the picture? Well, they're at high stock densities and they graze at high stock density. That is bullshit. Every single picture of the wildebeest they show you, the wildebeest is on a migration and it's fucking walking. Animals stop to graze. If they're grazing on the walk, it's because you've got your spurs in it and you're trying to get to the back of the mob. Does that make sense? When they graze, they put their heads down. Now look through all the photos those fellas show you and try and find a picture of a grazing animal with its head down grazing, and you won't find them if they're at a high density. They're actually spread out. Those same wildebeest before the migration starts are spread out because they're not freaking stupid. They don't eat underneath each other's asses. Okay? They spread out to graze. Oh yeah, there'll be days when the lions get on it, which is going to be a bit like what Stuart showed you, the picture down at the creek. Well, what happens if a lion got in there? Then there'd be a mob doing a bit of circuit work and hooning around and trying to get away. And yes, they'll dig up the country a little bit. But the rest of the time, animals are actually trying to graze. So you've seen the wildebeest pictures of them going over the cliffs and getting eaten by the crocodiles. Well, it takes a pretty skilled chopper pilot to get them to do that. Okay, so if you spread out what I've just said again and you go and look through Western books and paintings and pictures, and I've searched for those, mate, the only ones I find is one of a single bison or 3 bison with head down grazing. That's the only ones you'll find. Because when there's a big mob of them, well, there's a freaking train with about 600 guns sticking out the side and they're shooting the shit out of them. Okay? Right. So, now people want to run cattle at high stock densities. Guess what? Animals at really high stock densities, they can't choose how to build their feed together for the day. They're being forced to eat this right now when actually that's something they could eat this afternoon. So anybody who wants to know more about that, look up Fred Provenza, Dr. Fred Provenza, and study his stuff. Animals build their meals. They eat this at this time, a little hors d'oeuvre or whatever you want to call it. They have an oyster and then they follow it with a steak and then they finish it off with a good strong whiskey or something, right? Right. Purposefully creating short, vibrant paddocks. So, Mick this morning talking to me. How much? 15. Oh, 15, super, thank you. Mick and I talking earlier on this morning, and I'm talking about how difficult it is to get people to change shit because I'm dealing with all this stuff that you have to face with, and that's why I go back to principle. But really, with grazing naturally, we're going to create a whole lot of variables. We're going to do this afternoon, and we'll do it again tomorrow, so we'll get time to fill in these gaps. But really what's happening is you trying to create, on purpose, short, vibrant plant growth. And you're trying to make that happen so that those plants will produce as much sugar as possible, sequester the carbon, and therefore produce that soil which passes the bucket test. Okay, we do that by creating that to happen. So we don't want to undergraze, we want to use it heavily. Oh, I've gone backwards now somehow. Right? So we want to create soils that pass the bucket test and are highly structured in how they're built. So I thought I'd just throw this bit of the school in now. This is the plant growth bit, because there's a hell of a lot of furfies about plant growth and how it happens. So on the left-hand side of the picture, 1 to 3 leaves, plants are highly sensitive to grazing. In other words, you graze them too many times when they're 1 to 3 leaves, and the plants will reduce their productivity. They'll drop off on production. They'll still tighten up and they'll do a great job at filling in the gaps, but they will drop in their productivity. Between 4 and 6 leaves is the ideal time to graze a plant. Anyone who's been around me before, that's at about a beer can high for most country. Okay, just at a beer can, 4 to 6 leaves. Christine Jones would be telling people to graze at 6, which means you graze at 8, which is too late. I tell you to graze at 4, which means you're more likely to graze them at 5 and 6, because it takes a while to do the action. But the important bit that we're doing with this is the sugar production of the plant. That graph on there is the sugar production. It shuts off the moment the plant shifts from being vegetative production to reproductive production. So what does that mean? Well, reproductive means having children, right? In other words, it's producing seed. And most of you are thinking, oh, well, that's when I see the seed head. It's not. A grass plant produces its seed head at soil surface, at the meristem, at the soil surface. It then creates an auxiliary growth point, which it then, it's like the knot on a sugar cane, you know, the little knot on the sugar cane. That means that the seed head is sitting above that, and it begins to post it up. That is when the productivity or yield of the plant really climbs up. That's the yield line. So the moment you're getting this power of massive yield is when the plant is beginning to elongate the bits between the auxiliary growth points. The moment it's got the auxiliary growth points, that plant is going to head and is reducing the sugar production. And guess what it does to your pasture productivity? You get your MLA notes and have a look and just see how many megajoules or protein comes off it. It drops dramatically in pasture quality when it gets older. That's pasture quality, that picture here. Obviously, that first bit is good because of minerals, but animals don't need it because of the protein and the water. But then it improves as that plant grows taller and develops more. But the liquid carbon flow will drop away just as the nutrient is dropping away in that second half there, even though you might produce more yield. So we're going to purposefully produce this short feed because this is the critical picture. Water use. That graph, you see that graph of mine there? Basically, the moment the plant becomes reproductive, you can look this up in irrigation schedules, it'll quadruple the water use that it had before. What's your most limiting factor? Why is Stuart up here talking? Why am I here talking? Is because we want water efficiency in our pastures. Keep them young, you'll use less water. Now that 4 times is based on the vegetative part of it being in rows with bare ground in between, and it includes the evaporation out of the pan this is what to do those numbers, so evaporation is going to occur between the rows. So in reality, that number is much more. It's something like 10 times to 12 times the water use if you've got a pasture where the plants are covering the soil anyway, because you can leave evaporation out of it. So what we're trying to do basically is graze at the optimal time. If you're going to graze at 1 to 3 leaves, it's too soon. If you're going to graze 4 to 6, it's ideal. 6 plus, it's too late. So how do you get that right? What we do is we pick a paddock, and we'll get to this later on. For each mob, you pick a paddock and you get it right in that paddock. Intense grazers, keeping everybody short, you get that paddock operating in that spot, you move stock away, let it grow back. The moment it gets to 4 leaves, you make a plan to get them back in there, you put them in there and you graze it intensely again. You're on purpose creating short, vibrant, green grass, which then holds on to its moisture better and lasts you longer going into the season. The difference in the end is this. These are 2 pictures, one under my management and the other one not under my management. They across a fence, 10, 20 meters into the paddock on each side. That one is not under my management, the other one is. All I'm doing is graze that paddock. The moment it gets to this tall, we turn back into it, we graze it again. We turn back into it, we graze it again. We turn back into it and graze it again. The neighbour's got stock there all the time on that paddock, and you can see all the old dead feed underneath it. This is the feed that is left behind, the organic matter that's left behind to feed the saprotrophs, and it's that material there which will mislead that country into a woodland community. That other side is then, in that picture, is something like 20 days since it rained in that picture, and that's now heading into a Sabbath scenario, which we'll leave it for a full 12 months to get the opposite effect, because we don't want simplicity, we want extreme opposites to create more variation in management patterns so that we'll end up with more biodiversity in the long run. So that is the bigger scheme of thing of what we're trying to create. Now, lastly, in this morning's session, people are worried about overgrazing. Well, my definition of overgrazing, I thought it was under-grazing, in the end it turned out to be mine. I couldn't find it in his book when I went back. Frequent, repetitive, intensive grazing. Frigging country. Frequent. Is more frequent than Is everyone happy with that definition? Repetitive means same frequency again and again. Now you go to a lot of places where people do rotational grazing and they put their grazing charts out, 14 years of it, very impressed with themselves, zips down, look how clever I am, and you can go and have a look, and that paddock's grazed to the same intensity at the same time of year by the same class of stock, year after year after year after year. Same recovery periods, repeated, 30 days when it's growing fast, graze a third, leave a third, trample a third, all that bullshit. That's repetitive, that it leads to simplicity. We want complexity. We've got to have complex patterns of use, and that's one of those. And obviously, the more intensely you graze that particular plant when you graze it, because the animals still go to the plant they want. You'll see it today in the paddock or tomorrow, whichever of those opportunities you're going to have with me. You see the one that they come to and they graze. They don't want to graze the mature one. You know, who wants to spend time with an old grey-headed prick who is frustrated and old compared to a beautiful young person who's fresh and youthful and full of enthusiasm, you know? So the key though is that this frigging reduces plant productivity. It does hardly ever kills plants. It widens the plant spacing through lowering the productivity. The plants can't get going enough to cover that country. And so basically that's what I term as overgrazing. That's what I think overgrazing is reducing productivity. And it's not what we're after. So have a look on that website there and you can find some of those schools to look at. That same video we tried to watch earlier on was there. Questions? Richard.